Good morning, class. Can you please switch off your cell phones and open your textbooks to page 103? And this morning's lesson, we're going to talk about cytochemistry, the chemistry of cell membranes. And the title of this morning's lesson is A Journey of 37 trillion steps. Now, that's a lot of steps. That's enough to get you all the way around the world about 800 times. So that's one way of getting healthy. But that's not the journey I'm talking about today. Instead of journeying 800 times around the world, the journey I'm talking about is from here to here. Because as any biology student can tell you, we consist of approximately 37 trillion cells. And one of the secrets of how to age well, how to age successfully, how to age in a healthy way, is looking after the health of your cells, because ill health has its roots inside the cells, and a large part of that occurs within the membranes of the cell, the edge of the cell, where the cell finishes, and the external environment, the world, starts. And it's very clear when you look at public health statistics that our cell membranes, our cells, are not in a good condition. We have been neglecting them, and we pay a heavy price for that. Now, I'm going to show you some statistics which are derived from, as you can see here, USA National Health Surveys. And the reason why I'm looking at the American data is because it is, frankly, the worst in the world. Because it is in North America that ultra-processed foods have made the greatest impact. But they're simply showing us our near future. We're following in the same direction because the same companies that manufacture and sell these foods are flooding our markets as well. To the extent that in areas such as the Mediterranean, and you know how healthy the Mediterranean diet is supposed to be, well, it doesn't exist anymore. It's been obliterated by the juggernaut of the multinationals and their ultra-processed food products. And everywhere where they go, public health has declined. Let's go back in time to the very first national survey that was conducted in North America. And that's 1935, the very first survey. And you can see here that when this analysis was done, only approximately 1 adult in 10 could be identified with a lifestyle condition, a chronic degenerative disease. And the numbers of children and adolescents, it says here below 3%. It was substantially below 3%. It was probably closer to 2%. These are estimates. We don't have completely accurate data for this. But that was a fundamentally healthy population. Now, move up to 2000. And you can see here that almost half of all adults in North America at that time now have a non-communicable chronic degenerative disease. And by 2020, 2 out of 3. This is a very negative trend. And it's affecting children as well. I don't have figures for those that I can show you that data is still being collated, but they show the same negative trend. So, for example, when I first went to medical school back in the 20th century, conditions like ADD, ADHD were really uncommon, and now they affect, the latest estimates are approximately 3% of all children. And it was back in 1935, less than that percentage had all of the diseases. Now, at least 3% have only one. So this is a picture of a society that is in decline. It is a picture of a public that is actually being chronically poisoned. You see this also in the numbers of people who have more than one chronic degenerative condition. It shows the same increase. In 1935, well below 5%, less than 5 people in 100 had signs of more than one chronic clinical degenerative condition. And again, you see the same trend, 2006, 1 in 4, 2010, 1 in 3. The latest figures are still again being processed. I confidently expect that they will show a further increase. And what we see in the hospitals and in the clinics are increasing numbers of people presenting with multiple conditions who require polypharmaceutical management, lots and lots of different types of drugs. They're difficult to manage, they're expensive, and they use up inordinate amounts of healthcare resources. This is a sad and deeply negative situation. So what is it that is getting so much worse about public health? Well, the real question is, what isn't getting worse? So these are a list of conditions all of which are becoming more frequent, and almost all of which are occurring in younger and younger groups of patients. And this is not a complete list, because I know that being Zinzino people, you're all highly intelligent, and you've probably worked out by now that this is an alphabetical list, and you can see that it only goes from addiction to glaucoma. Well, there's more to the alphabet than that. We're not even halfway through. So let's see some more. Yeah, I could go on. This is not a complete list. And all of this is showing us, as I said, a population that is being chronically poisoned. So, for example, a farmer would understand that. If the farmer saw their pigs or their cows or their sheep all becoming sick and sicker in different ways, and seeing their life expectancy and their health expectancy decreasing. Why don't we see this? Mostly for political reasons, mostly because doctors specialize. That's what we're supposed to do. Medical scientists specialize. That's what we're supposed to do. That's how you build your career. So the oncologists know that they're seeing more cancer. The neurogeriatricians know that they're seeing more dementia. But just about every other specialist is seeing the same picture. But they don't talk to each other. They don't share their bad news. I have the wonderful opportunity, because I'm not a specialist, to speak to people who are and learn from them, which is a wonderful experience, but it's an extremely discouraging experience because I'm hearing this same pattern from almost everyone I speak to. Luckily, some things are decreasing, and one of them is intelligence. Many of you have seen this slide. And this slide is presented or generated from data which were collected by Michael Woodley of Meany, who's an eccentric but brilliant scientist. And he and his group have shown that since 1950, we haven't all the way got to 2110 yet, but if you look at the graph from 1950 to 2025, there has been an apparent decline in average intelligence of almost 15 IQ points. Now, frankly, we weren't that smart of a species to begin with. We can't afford to give away 15 IQ points. And the bad news is that there's no sign of this trend changing. This ongoing decline appears to be continuing. Now, he measured it using something called a motor response to visual stimuli, which is one way of measuring IQ, not necessarily the best, but it's reasonable. But when we try to measure intelligence using other techniques, we can do it by seeing how effective you are at mentally rotating a three-dimensional shape in your mind, or something that's called fine color discrimination, or by understanding or being able to construct complex sentences. There are many ways of measuring intelligence. They all show this same decline. And I know that every generation believes that they are more intelligent than the one that came before, but the opposite seems to be the case. We are becoming less sapiens. So we should be concerned about our children. And perhaps we should also be concerned whether we're actually going to have any. Because again, I'm sure many of you have seen this slide before, and this is an issue that has received a great deal of publicity, but we are becoming less able to procreate. So women's infertility has long been a recognized issue. We're seeing more and more males, because of this catastrophic decline in sperm counts, who are either subclinically infertile or completely infertile. The only part of the world where we do not see this happening to the same extent, and that is the yellow line. This is in a part of the world where ultra-processed foods have not yet made much of an impact, and that is predominantly Africa. And this is one of the reasons for the demographic changes that we're seeing in different parts of the world, which, again, is one of the factors underlying the current problems with migration. So this is an area where nutritional standards are affecting us not only personally, not only at the levels of our societies, but also at the levels of our communities, our cultures, our societies. We're committing slow suicide. That is the reality. And men and women should also be concerned that not only are male sperm counts falling, but so are male testosterone levels. Males are becoming less male. You know, this is an area, a part of the world which used to be populated by Vikings. Not many of those left. Well, maybe dog counts, but you don't. Yeah, but these are real and present dangers that we are facing. We're facing profound changes to our species, to our epigenomes, to our metabolomes, to the very core of who and what we are. I think we have to stop. All this has happened during a time when the pharmaceutical industry has become extraordinarily successful. One blockbuster after another. More refined drugs emerging onto the market every other month. And what have they done to stop this decline in public health? Nothing, because all drugs do is manage symptoms. They don't address the underlying issues. They don't attempt to put the basic things right. They don't attempt to correct our diet, because it is in the diet, which feeds through to our cell membranes, that the roots of all of these problems lie. All the drug industry has done is, well, they've been extremely successful. Their metric is predominantly a financial one. They have grown to the point where they have come to control, corrupt all of the regulatory agencies. This is not a healthy situation. When did the rot start to set in? Well, this is a graph that I found buried in the libraries of the CDC. Now, the CDC used to contain an agency called the National Center for Health Sciences, which doesn't exist anymore. Very important graph, which has been hidden away for a long time. And if you look at the continuous lines, this is respiratory tract health issues. The continuous lines talk about infectious diseases, such as pneumonia or tuberculosis, and deaths caused by infection have been declining. The dotted lines describe non-communicable diseases, such as COPD or lung cancer, and they have been increasing. And you can see that the changes really start to happen at about 1940, and 1950 is when the changeover occurs. The infections have become secondary. The non-communicable diseases have become primary. And what that shows is the impact of fast and ultra-processed foods, which were first introduced into the national diet round about in the early 1940s. And the toxic effects of these foods started to become apparent in public health within about 10 years. It took 10 years for the damage to really show. Now, we can talk about different components of these foods, but one of the key components are the fatty acids that they contain. Now, the graph on the left was put together by a group involving Professor Joe Hilborn, who is someone we were both attached to the Institute of Food, Brain and Behavior at Oxford, and he did a beautiful study looking at the increase in people's intake of soybean oil. And since 1900, that's increased 1,000 times. And over on the right, you can see the decline in intakes of omega-3s, and that has resulted in approximately a reduction by half of the percentage of omega-3s in our cell membranes and the percentage of omega-3s as a percentage of total fatty acids. And these are related to our intakes of ALA and LA, which we call essential fatty acids. And then we have to ask, why are they essential? Because they have structural functions and they have biochemical functions. They are the backbone, the bulk of the cell membrane. Those fatty acids, you can see them here. They're the little tails on those molecules which form the cell membranes, and it's important to have the right proportions of saturated fatty acids, monounsaturates, polyunsaturates. That determines things like flexibility. But those fatty acids are also important because they are at the beginning of, I warned you about the biochemistry. You don't have to look at this. You don't even have to know the detail. If you're nervous dispositions, look away now. So the point is, omega-6s and omega-3s, they form in the body, inside the cell, inflammatory compounds and anti-inflammatory compounds. Okay? And you need to have the right balance of these. But the problem is we're eating so much omega-6 that we are no longer able to take the precursor, alpha-linolenic acid, which you find in flaxseed oil. The enzymes are full of the omega-6s. They've got no room for omega-3s, so we cannot use the omega-3s in flaxseed oil or in walnut oil. We just cannot use them. So what we have to do, if we are going to build up our omega-3s, is to take them already formed in the form of EPA and DHA, which you only find in seafoods, in oily fish, in certain seaweeds, if you like to eat seaweed. So drink more fish oil. Drink more mulestran. And what's the point? It doesn't work. We know that eating oily fish does work. There's all kinds of demographic studies, epidemiological studies that show this. But it turns out that drinking fish oil doesn't. There are all kinds of studies which show that drinking ordinary types of fish oil, standard commercial fish oils, do not really offer you very much, if any, protection against the problems that I was talking about earlier. And then you have to ask yourself, why is that? And it turns out that it's all about bioavailability. Now, you can absorb fatty acids into your blood easily. It doesn't matter what shape or form they're in, whether they're esters, ketones, free fatty acid, makes no difference. Easy to get them into the blood, but they don't work in the blood. You have to build them into your cell membranes for them to be effective. That is what we call secondary bioavailability, and commercial fish oil simply does not succeed. So we know that in Europe, the average 6-to-3 ratio is approximately 15-to-1. In people who take fish oil supplements, it brings it down to about 10-to-1. Great, but it's meaningless. You're moving in the right direction, but things don't really start to work until you get down to about 5-to-1 or below. People who eat oily fish a lot do have ratios below that, and they have a lot of protection against chronic degenerative disease, and so do people who drink balance oil, because balance oil is not fish oil. It is an oily fish, but in liquid form, because we put back the polyphenols into the blend. And the polyphenols are really important. Where do they come from? Where does fish oil come from? Not really from fish, they come from marine algae, or seaweeds. Now, marine algae are at the bottom of the marine food chains, just as plants are at the bottom of the terrestrial food chain. And it is the omega-3s and the polyphenols produced by the seaweeds. They bind together, and the polyphenols protect the omega-3s so that they can be eaten by the krill, and they pass through the gut and the tissues of the krill, and then the small fish, and then the bigger fish, and then the apex predator, which might be a killer whale, or it could be your grandmother eating a dish of herring. Now, I know you don't think of your grandmother as an apex predator, but in this sense she is. And she is consuming not only the omega-3s and the polyphenols, and you absolutely need them both. Omega-3s are very fragile molecules. They could not survive in the marine food chains on their own. You never find them on their own. They are always present with the polyphenols, which are effectively chaperones. Again, you can look through your mobile phones, text your friends. You don't have to look at this. But the whole point of this is that green box there is arachidonic acid. That's the omega-6. You make that into pro-inflammatory compounds. Too much arachidonic acid in your cell membranes is not good, but this is where the polyphenols do the other thing that they need to do. They're chaperones, they get the omega-3s to where they need to be, but then they start to have an anti-inflammatory effect of their own. They block all of those enzymes, and they block these enzymes too. This is the whole of the anti-inflammatory sequence. Forget it. All you need to know is that at the end of this very complex sequence, there is an event that leads to the slow destruction of healthy tissue. That's why inflammation makes you sick, because it degrades your bone, your cartilage, your blood vessels. It kills off your brain cells. And luckily, the polyphenols work here too. The polyphenols are adding anti-inflammatory protection at all these different steps of the inflammation cascade, which is why we need to eat lots of polyphenols together with our omega-3s. The problem is the modern diet has not only given us all the wrong 6-to-3 ratios, they've also taken the polyphenols away. You need to put them both back in. Just taking omega-3s will not do it. And that's why we recombine them in balance oil. And that's why balance oil works, where our competitors don't. And by using the test, we have numbers that we can follow, that doctors require. They want to know that something is working. They can test their patients before and after. They can see the progress, not only in terms of improving test values, but in terms of their patients' improving condition. This is what we need to see when we're dealing with patients. We don't want to take nutrition just on the basis of faith. What about the children? I mentioned the children earlier, and this is a huge area of concern because we're seeing so many more children who are on the spectrum. And the spectrum is more extensive than you think, because it is not only the usual suspects, but intermittent explosive disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and now schizophrenia is increasingly being regarded as a spectrum disorder, just one that shows up a little later in life. And this has been recognized in the DSM-5, which is the Directory of Diagnostic and Statistics of Mental Disease, which is the psychiatrist's Bible. Neurodiversity, great. I'm all for difference. And people who are a little bit schizoid or who have a little bit of ADD, ADHD, they can actually be extremely productive. They extend our capacity, our range of capacities. But at a certain point, it becomes neurodivergence. It gets to the point where people are less able to cope. They're less able to fully develop the potential arc of their lives. And we know this because many people who are further out on the spectrum and find it difficult to go along with normal social behaviors, too many of them end up in prison. The prisons are full of patients who should not be in prison, who should be helped. And this is where it becomes a subject of huge importance to me, and I think relevance to you, because we know that as the brain is developing in utero, it's an extremely complicated process. There's a wiring diagram, and it must follow. But that progress can be disturbed if the mother is suffering from chronic inflammatory stress. And what that shows us is, and we're already seeing examples of this, that if you can help a pregnant mother not to have chronic inflammatory stress, and we know how to do that now, we know that we can greatly reduce the risk of that child developing a substantial neurodevelopmental problem. And we can perhaps go even further than that. We can move from prevention to treatment. I cannot talk about this. The law will not allow me to tell you the truth. But if you're interested, see if you can find someone at your table or perhaps next to you who can tell you about what our health protocol did for their neurodivergent child. I have seen children who were diagnosed by experts as being far out on the spectrum. When I meet them after they've been through our program, I honestly can't tell that they are anything other than normal. It's been We're saving these children's future lives. We're saving their family structures. This is a subject of, it means a lot to me. Don't forget the gut. Pontus mentioned that. We know that the dysbiosis is very important for these children, so we try to treat that. But many adults have this too. Dysbiosis is increasingly recognized as a major risk factor for a whole range of conditions, which is why, even though the xenobiotic works on its own, balance oil works on its own, but when you put them together, the effect of the two, of the combination, is much greater than the sum of its parts. You'll see this for yourselves, and you'll see this for yourselves in your clients. So we're at a point now where we can start to look in great detail as to how the modern life, how the industrial diet is harming us. It's harming us epigenetically, it's harming our metabolism, and it's affecting us in 4 key ways. You can see here chronic inflammation, dysbiosis. I don't have time to talk about type B malnutrition and glycemic mismatch, but it's all in my blog and in my lectures. If you're interested, you can go into the detail. We're at the point now where we can see how our low-energy lifestyle makes this worse. And perhaps most importantly of all, we can start to think about antidotes. Antidotes to the modern world. A combination of products which will take your metabolism and put it into a time machine and send it back to an earlier time before ultra-processed food, when people were much healthier, so that you can become your own blue zone. These are the antidotes: balance oil, xenobiotic, extend, and the last one is something that we understand, we have the science for, we have candidate products, and the only reason why we have not yet launched them into Europe is because of a couple of legislators in Denmark and in Germany who have been bought off by the pharmaceutical industry, and that's the plain and simple truth. So we're at a point now where we can take this terribly unhealthy population, I showed you some of the statistics to begin with, and bring the public, bring the world back to health in a way that the pharmaceutical industry cannot do. So here are the principles of pharmaconutrition. We can rectify the problems that are occurring in the cells in your tissues using balance oil. We can remedy many of the problems that are occurring in the gut with something called xenobiotic, which many of you are familiar with. Type B malnutrition, extend, very simple, and resilience. God knows how many children are depressed and anxious now, particularly in North America, but the figures are trending here too. We can help them too. with a product that is neither addictive, nor is it liable to produce suicidal or homicidal instincts that we see with the classical antidepressants. And it's really an answer to many families' problems and to many children's problems. I've seen families healed with this type of approach. So, you know, I used to work with the pharmaceutical industry. I used to believe in it. I was a believer. Back in the 60s, all these blockbuster drugs were being introduced, and I did think that this was the future. We would learn to cure all the diseases. The last half-century has been one disappointment after another, and slowly the scales fell from my eyes, and I realized that actually this is the answer. This is what we should have been doing. The only reason we didn't was because the drug industry has the money, the lobbying power, and the political support that allows them to continue to dominate the health scene. And they have ruined us. We are at last at a point where we can change tracks. More and more doctors are coming to join us. I don't want to bang my own drum, and in some senses it's not important, but one of the last papers I wrote was introduced by the head of oncology of the Mayo clinics. The point is that even at the heart of medical orthodoxy, the physicians, the clinical scientists are getting to understand what we're doing here. And there are many good men and women amongst them. And they are beginning to understand that we have answers. We have the answers that they need. They are joining us, and it is you who are making this possible. So thank you so much. Thank you.